And here we are. I am joined today with an incredible individual who is heavily involved in video games and also comics and anything nerdy and amazing, really. And so I'm so happy to introduce Mary Kenney. Please tell people about yourself.
Hi, I'm Mary. I am a senior writer at Insomniac Games. Right now, I'm working on Marvel's Wolverine. In the past, I worked on Marvel's Spiderman, Miles Morales. I worked for a little while on Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. And before that, I was a writer at Telltale Games. And as you just said, I also dabble in the book space. I have a book coming out in a month from recording, but a month called...
Who knows when it'll be from this point? A couple of weeks, yesterday, soon-ish. We'll put a link in the description.
Sometime in the temporal sphere, I have a book that is called Gamer Girls, 25 Women Who Built the Video Game Industry, is the book I have coming out. And then I also work in comics. I've written for IDW for a few years now, doing My Little Pony, Read Only Memories, and I also did Godzilla. So
yeah, it was Mothra, wasn't it? It was Rivals Mothra.
Godzilla, versus Mothra, which is great. It was so much fun.
You are incredibly busy with everything. And also, that's not to speak about with questions that I can't ask and you wouldn't answer anyway, of all the things going on in the background that you can't talk about. So it's like you are an incredibly busy individual. So before we delve in deep into any of the specific subject matter, let's ask about your sort of how you got into this realm. So your kind of first and earliest memories of comic books or video games, kind of the thing that you recall sparking the passion for these things. Please tell us about that and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So as a kid, I was a big reader as far back as I can remember. And my first video game was Neverwinter Nights, the original, on PC. And my uncle gave it, kind of loaned it to me. Maybe she'll like it. She probably won't. I know she likes fantasy. She's a little nerd. My first fantasy books were the Dragonlance series. So he's like, this is similar. So he loaned me this game and that was it. You could not pry me off the computer. It was my new favorite thing. It was everything I loved about reading a book, but I got to be in it. I got to make choices in it. I got to make my own character. That's so cool. So that really sucked me into video games when I was young, and I grew up playing them, which is very cool. I've never left since then. But then I kind of took a break from video games, really in high school, just because I was busy. It wasn't, I don't like them anymore. I was just busy and in high school. But I came back to them in college when Dragon Age Origins came out. And my then boyfriend, now husband, bought it. And I saw him playing it. And I was like, he's making the bad decisions. I need to make better decisions. So I played that. Sucked me right back into video games, and I've been here ever since. Comic books I came to a little bit later. I as a kid, I started out, watching. I loved all the X-Men shows. I loved Justice League. I loved Teen Titans, and then kind of in a roundabout way, started getting to read them in middle school. I was like, oh, you can borrow comic books from the library. I had no idea, and that's kind of what sucked me in.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, with myself, I was into video games at a young age. I think my earliest memory ever was getting a Game Boy Color, I think when I was about 4 or 5 or something. And it was from then, it was that, and I got a PlayStation shortly after that, and Crash Bandicoot, etc. So video games were a hugely part of my young life. And then, I came to comics a bit later as well. Probably even later than you. I read a lot of comics when I was really young. There's things in England called the Beano and the Dandy. That's where Dennis the Menace came from. I don't know if Americans are even aware that much of Dennis the Menace. You're nodding, so you're probably aware, but I don't know if any of my other audience really know who Dennis the Menace really is, apart from I think there's a rubbish movie out about it. But from that young age, I did that, and then I read a bit, but in school, college sort of time, I drifted off reading a bit, and then when I got into the Disney era of Star Wars and stuff, when we had so much more new content and things, and I'm a massive Star Wars fan, tattoos and everything is Star Wars, so everything about that, but a friend of mine got me some comics of that, and I was like, oh, this is quite cool. Dr. Aphra, what an interesting character. And then, flash forward 2 years, and I was like, I need every single Star Wars comic there is. And then my friend's like, why are you only reading Star Wars? There's this amazing, have you read The Killing Joke? No, I haven't. What are you doing with your life? Go read that. And slowly it's kind of the greatest hits of Marvel and DC and certain indie comics as well. I'm slowly getting in that realm. So You know, I wish I'd got into it earlier though, but then, you know, there's only a finite amount of time in the day. So it's like.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I had a sort of a similar experience in that I had read some of Alan Moore's stuff. I love V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta is my favorite movie. And so I went back and obviously read the comics. And all my friends were like, why haven't you read Watchmen yet? Like, and I kept being like, oh, I don't, it's so big and it's like scary and it's such a staple. And then finally, like 2 years ago, I read it and I was like, well, why didn't I do this earlier? Oh, if only someone had told me. It's really good. Yeah. But you're right. There's a finite amount of time and there's a lot of stuff out there. So.
Well, yeah. And I was about to say like, oh, if I didn't have a job or if I didn't have a job, I could do all these things. But obviously the only way I could not actually have a job is win the lottery, which I don't even partake in the lottery. So, you know, someone incredibly rich just have to give me loads of money. And I don't know anyone rich. But I was thinking like, oh, but if, you know, podcasting took off to such a degree, I could make a full-time career off it. I was like, maybe I'd have more time. It's like, no, I'd be more like what you're doing, which is like you're getting to do a lot of what you're passionate about in your career. But that doesn't mean you've got more free time. What it means is because you're so passionate about your job, you're investing even more free time into being able to do certain things with your job. And then you're like, oh, I've got a few hours free a day. Why don't I write a book? Oh, I've got a few other things. Why don't I fill the time with everything conceivable that you can? So
yeah. And I'm fairly relentless about carving out some time for myself where I'm not working, because when I first got into games and writing fiction professionally, I wasn't like that. And I was burning myself out very quickly. Cause like I wake up at the time, I woke up really early, like at 4 a.m. for no apparent reason, but woke up really early. I'd like have a cup of coffee and then I dive right into, I'm going to be writing all day. And, maybe I stop around like 6:30 or 7 because then fiance, now husband, is saying, maybe we should eat dinner. Maybe you could relax like a little bit. I don't know. And I was in real danger of burning myself out when I first got into the industry. Cause you're right. Cause you're so passionate about what you do. And you're like, this is what I want to do all the time. What else am I going to do? So it became really important to get hobbies that are not my job and kind of really be strict about carving out like, this is the time every day where I'm going to run or walk or go antiquing or like do something that is separate, which has helped a lot, I will say, because it is very easy to fall into that.
Yeah, I think for people who are incredibly passionate about really any aspect of their life, it's very important to, as you say, time manage to a degree of not being so you're 100% efficient. So it's that you have breathing room. Because even I've found with podcasting, like with my partner, it's like, I have to make sure every evening we do have some time together. But there's, especially at the moment, as of recording this, there's Kenobi, Ms. Marvel, Stranger Things, The Boys, RuPaul's Drag Race, All Star Series 7. And that's just all the things that are like in our immediate vicinity. Not to mention we're also watching Buffy, because she's never seen Buffy before.
Oh, wow.
I watched when I was younger. She's never had any of it spoiled. We're on Series 6. She has no idea what's going to happen. It's like, oh, can't wait. But it's like, I've had to do that as well. And even with podcasting, I'm like, I've slowly, it started to drift into my free time because I'm like, I could do a podcast about Disney movies and I know Megan would want to be involved in that. So now the hobby is, I watch a movie that's fun, but I'm writing notes the whole time. So I'm like half working. So I still have to have a few shows. I'm like, let's just watch this show. I won't even talk about it on the podcast because otherwise it will spiral out.
It really changes it. Yeah, no, I've talked to a lot of fellow, game writers and just people in game dev in general. Like it shifts the way that you play video games. Like I just noticed things that I wouldn't have noticed a few years ago about, how this animation is firing and how this line of dialogue is hooked up and stuff that I normally wouldn't think about. I wouldn't say that it's ruined it for me. It's just shifted it for me. And I know a lot of people who, try to not necessarily avoid, but limit how many games within their own genre, the ones that they're working on that they play. Right. So it's like, let's say if you work on single player, linear action games, maybe you're playing multiplayer in your free time because it doesn't feel like work as much. So that I totally get what you mean.
And that's a problem with nerd culture, especially in the modern era, where there's such an unfathomable amount of content. It's as well, it's overloading, and we just want to consume it all because it's so much of it is so cool, and there's so many creators now that are getting the spotlight as they should have been over the last God knows how many decades. But they're finally getting that. So it's like, oh my God, there's so many more cool things with representation and this character's coming out. And obviously where you were one of the writers on Miles Morales, and that's like a massive landmark. I mean, in the last, probably 5 years ago, the majority of people, you go, who's Spider-Man? And they go, Peter Parker. And there was not even a question of anyone else. And then, Spider-Verse dropped, and then shortly after Miles Morales dropped. And then suddenly it's like, oh, there's more than one Peter Parker, and he's a person of color. And it's like, oh, and the whole elements in the game itself really lean into certain parts. Like my girlfriend, she's half Italian. She's a languages teacher, so she speaks Spanish and French, and she's Italian, and she speaks English. And I'm just here like, I can speak English quite well. But like I loved in that game, there's little parts of where like, especially the conversation with the mum, whose name I've forgotten.
Rio,
there you go. And so with her, it's like, and she speaks in Spanish. And it's got that, I love that element. And it's quite an interesting part that, especially in American culture over the last 5-10 years, I think Lin-Manuel Miranda is part to play in this, but the Spanglish kind of coming into the mainstream a lot more. So I just love that kind of, you don't have to have a game that's just like, this game is about Spanish culture and that's it. And this game is about Harlem and nothing else. It's like, no, culture is a ever shifting, combining thing all the time. So in Miles Morales specifically, I loved playing that and having those elements come into it.
Yeah. It was a special project because we felt the same way, and we worked with writers and, I mean, honestly, researchers and linguists specifically on the Spanish. So like there are different dialects of Spanish that you will hear in different parts of the game. Everybody in that cast was also just really passionate about what we were doing. And that, I think that came through in the final product.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, the voice work was absolutely flawless. It was like, it really helped with the immersion of the game. And one note I wanted to add was when I listened to you on the, I think it's She Games podcast, or She Makes Games podcast.
She plays games. Yeah.
She plays games. Sorry, yeah. Your second appearance on that, I thought it was excellent, both yourself and the host. But I think at the start of the conversation, there was a mention on sort of how you got into Miles Morales. How as in you became a writer on there, and I really liked the anecdote of that when you were kind of first interviewed. So I wonder if you can. Yeah, I'm stealing bits from other podcasts. I will say to other people, go check out that podcast. I'll make sure I include a link because it was a really, really cool conversation. I'm trying not to tread the same ground, but that anecdote is too good to miss. So if you could share it with us again, please.
I'm happy to tell this anecdote a million times. So the anecdote is after I was working at Telltale when Spider-Man came out, and after Telltale closed, I played the heck out of Spider-Man, and Miles was my favorite character, like far and away. I loved it. Every time he showed up, all of his playable missions, he was my favorite. And I have, let's say, an active Twitter account and, kind of put out in the world, wow, I'm playing so much Spider-Man. I will never, emerge from the void because I love it here. And so I applied to the writing job at Insomniac, and they brought me in for interviews. And Brian Intihar, who was the creative director of Spider-Man, asked me like, okay, so we can tell from your Twitter that you've played Spider-Man. And I was like, oh God. He's like, so we can tell that you played Spider-Man. If you were hired and, what would you make next with that franchise? If it were up to you, what would you make next with the franchise? And I said, I would make a Miles game. I love Miles. He's the best. Now, he already knew that they were hiring me for a Miles game that had not been announced yet. So he's sitting there like extreme poker face as I'm just waxing poetic. And this is why I think a Miles game would be amazing because, and he's just like, yeah, no, I agree. Because we've already greenlit it. It's already happening. Cough. So yes, that is the anecdote. I launched into why I thought a Miles game would be perfect and magical and great. And they were, in fact, hiring me for a Miles game. So my first day at Insomniac a few months later, first day, they're like, okay, so you're on the Miles game. And I was like, yes. So yeah, that's the whole.
I love it. It was so funny. I could imagine being that gentleman and being there and just being like, I can't even reveal even slightly, even if you said something slip like, oh, it's really good that you like Miles Morales, and you'd go, oh, why? And he'd be like, no reason.
Because he is a person. Moving on.
He is a good, yes. So speaking of sort of writing and things, I know that you had, before you were a video game writer, you had a career as a journalist. So I wonder if you could tell us sort of, how did you get into journalism? How did that kind of feed into your video game writing? Like, was that the plan? Just a sort of a generous idea of how did you kind of get to where you are today, or from where you were to sort of Miles Morales and you're kind of the big spotlight on you where everyone kind of knew your name in a sense?
Yeah, goodness. There was certainly no plan. There was not a plan. So I knew from the time I was pretty young that I wanted to be a writer. In high school, I was actually torn between wanting to be a writer or wanting to go into music. So when I first got to college, I was actually a music major, but I knew pretty fast that like, I don't want to do this. I want to be a writer. But I come from a very pragmatic family that was like, if you're going to be a writer, you can't do like creative writing. People don't get jobs in that. And as I'm saying this, I want all of you listeners, if you are majoring in creative writing, yes, people do get jobs in it. You're fine. Like, I support you because the moral of the story is going to be that was wrong. But okay. But I wanted to be very pragmatic. So I went for a degree in journalism because I'm like, that is a way to write, but also, actually be employed. The problem is I chose newspapers, not knowing that they were maybe not about to have a heyday, let's say, in American media. So I went into newspapers and I ended up, I was a journalist for a few years. I worked in newspapers and in magazines for a few years. And the parts of it that I really enjoyed were getting to talk to people and getting to travel and meet a bunch of people who were very different from me. I think this informs, my work today is that I'm getting to write a lot of fiction and talk to a lot of people and learn a lot of things I otherwise wouldn't. So that's great. But that was the part of journalism I liked. There were a lot of parts of journalism I just frankly didn't enjoy, though. I wasn't really loving my career, even though it was going pretty well. So a few years into being a journalist, I decided to apply to grad school, either in creative writing or in game design. And I got into NYU's Game Center for their MFA in game design. And I was there for a year. And after a year, got an internship at Telltale, went to do that and worked on Batman, The Enemy Within while I was an intern. And at the end of the internship, they were like, do you want to stay like forever? And I went, yep. So I stayed at Telltale. I moved off of Batman and onto pre-production for Walking Dead, the final season, where we sketched out the whole story of the whole season, and that was also really a special project. It has a special place in my heart. I have a tattoo of it. It's a whole thing. But I was lead episode writer, episode 2 of that series, and I was a writer on the whole series, and that's kind of where it just took off. I was at Telltale, and then after Telltale, after the layoffs, I was freelancing for about 6 months, and then I started at Insomniac on Miles, and I've been in Insomniac for 3 years now. Yeah,
incredible. Yeah, amazing. It's one of those things like when you have creative individuals, there's the term I think is analysis paralysis, where sometimes there's too many paths, and you're just like, I could go this way, I could go that way, and it's when you have a family who is pragmatic, it's kind of like they would. Like my dad was always like, you should become an accountant. And I was like, okay. I mean, I was good at maths and I was fairly good at IT stuff. And he was like, you make loads of money being an accountant. And it's like, now nearing 30, I'm like, I could really have used that accountant salary, when buying this house. But, I tried accountancy in college and it was so awful. I was just like, no offense to anyone who's an accountant. We need accountants in the world, but not for me. Yeah. I couldn't do that. So there is that line of things, and I really enjoy media. But I was like, trying to pursue media. And it's that kind of thing of like, trying to pursue something that's really enjoyable and fun, but trying to pursue something that can actually make you money. Because I would just be happy to kind of just bounce around doing vague media stuff for almost my entire life, but making no money. So you have to try and find that balance, really. And it's amazing that you did.
Thanks. Yeah. No, I talked to, so I started teaching narrative design last fall. And that's something I talk about with my students a lot, is it's not, you do need to balance, do you love this? Are you passionate about it? But also some people are going to choose to go into careers that they're not passionate about because it's more important to them to have this kind of work-life balance, or being able to live here, being able to afford this, like all of that needs to go into your decisions. We had a lot of conversation about that. I think it's important. Like, for me, it is really important. I don't want to sit down and do 40 plus hours a week in a job I don't like. It would just make me fundamentally unhappy. But for some people, that's fine. Like, it's just everybody's different,
And just in with the education element of what you were saying, it's something I think is very important, which is, as you said, is with the balance. I think that one issue with certain elements of education, I know that the British education system, especially for the mandatory parts of school, and similarly in America as well, it's kind of, I think they're trying to break out of it now a bit, but it's kind of that one size fits all. It's like, this is how we do it for everyone. And it's like, there's some people who don't do great at school, even though they're incredibly intelligent, and vice versa. So I wondered if, just to ask, with your approach to teaching, like what made you go into that? It's not something that one would often associate with, oh, I was one of the head writers at Miles Morales. Oh, cool. I also teach stuff. It's like, that's amazing, but I didn't connect those dots. So what if you could just talk about how you kind of got into that and why, really, in all honesty?
Why would you do that?
My girlfriend's a teacher, so I see some of the problems with being a teacher, but I do understand there's a lot of stuff you can really gain from it. It's very rewarding in the right ways. But yeah, I'd love to hear your take on it, really.
Yeah. So first I want to draw a line between myself and people who teach full time, because, oh my goodness, what a hard job. What like that seems
public
really
schools
hard.
and things.
Yeah, exactly. But I do, I taught 8 class last fall, and I will be teaching again this year. And the reason I went into it, I really love teaching. I started off kind of testing the waters. So I went to Indiana University for my degree in journalism, and which was it's in the media school, is the school that it's in. And they a few years ago now started a game design degree, but bachelor's, and I think they have a master's too. Yes, they do. I'm doing great here, but they also have a degree in game design. And so I met a couple of people who were working on getting the classes up to speed, like setting everything up. A few years ago at GDC, and we just got to talking, and I said something kind of offhand about like, well, if you ever need a writing teacher, and they went, sorry, what? Because there aren't a ton. Because there aren't a ton of game writers, and thus there aren't a ton of game writing teachers. So they kind of pulled me in to teach like a weekend workshop. And a couple times, and that was kind of the test. I taught a 1 credit class that was just like 3 days long. It was Friday through Sunday. And after I had done that a couple times, I realized I really liked it, and they realized I was not terrible at it. And so we moved ahead, and they got me in to teach narrative design for a semester. And then again, it was like, do I really have the bandwidth for this? Do I really like it? And the answer is yes. I think it's interesting that you say like, oh, someone who worked, as a video game writer, becoming a teacher is a little weird. And actually, I think I don't think your perception is wrong, but I think we have more in common than people might think, because as Walt Williams has said, who is the narrative director on Wolverine, so the person I work with very closely, as he says a lot, game writing, half of it is just being a really good writer who can pull people into a story and come up with great characters and do good dialogue, all that stuff. But half of it is teaching, because we are teaching you how to play the video game. We are telling you, this is how this mechanic works. This is how you can tell that's the direction to go. This is how, we are, a lot of what ends up in a video game is also just teaching you how to get through the thing. So game writers, maybe even more than others, are kind of primed to be teachers and explainers as well. So that's my perspective. I really like it. I really have enjoyed teaching it. I'm also just really passionate about getting new game writers in the industry. I think you were talking earlier about we're seeing so many new stories from new and diverse creators. And I think that's where we have to start, is that we are nurturing, people from diverse backgrounds early, and giving you all the lessons and propping you up to join this industry as firmly as we can. So I want to see more people break into the industry. I want to see more and more stories from more and more different people, and teaching feels like a good way to do that. And I really enjoy it. I like giving people script notes and helping them figure out how to tell the stories bouncing around in their head. It's been a good experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. And this is a question that I didn't write down because it only just came to me. So I'm not expecting a massive answer on this, just in case I know that it's maybe too close to the grain of the where you work and things. But with your recent promotion and things, have you found that the teaching element has helped? Because where you obviously, in any job, as you go higher up, you become more senior. Generally speaking, you then have more knowledge to impart on people below you, or you have more air quotes power on the team below you. So I wondered if the teaching element has kind of synergistically worked in both parts of your career in life, the teaching element and also the video game part.
Yeah, I would say yes. Teaching, I've had to kind of level up my public speaking skills a bit as I stumble over the word, which is just like chef's kiss. But like had to step up public speaking, being better at pitching, being better at just explaining stuff. I do think it did feed into each other, and it. When I told my boss, actually the head of the story department, Armand Constantine, who is great, when I told him that I was planning to teach, he actually set up a bunch of opportunities at Insomniac to get ready to teach. Where I could mentor our interns and I could teach our class of interns. And so it also has directly fed into each other because they've also helped me with that and vice versa. Some of the stuff that I taught my class at IU, I have in turn taken to Insomniac and taught other people and shared, some of the insights that we all had. So yes, the short answer is, yep, it all feeds into each other. The long answer is it directly did because people on both sides kind of helped mentor me, and that I really appreciated that as well.
That's amazing. I always like hearing about when I think people underestimate how important it is when you, both in your personal hobbies and things, but in life, just having a diverse, not only outlook of culture, but diverse things you'd want to do. Like my career of the air quotes money making career, I worked in graphic design and I worked at a cassette and CD production place. So I would design artwork and things. I would also somewhat master audio and things, and I get to play with cassettes, which was amazing. This is only when I leave there. I left there about 5 years ago. So it's in the last 10 years I was dealing with cassettes and the full players and everything. It was really interesting. And then when my hobby became going into podcasting, prior to that I'd done a bit of YouTube stuff. I'd made music videos for bands and things. And then when I started on podcasting, I was like, I have almost every ability to do every little bit in podcasting. I've got a bit of audio, I've got a bit of graphic design, so I don't need to ask anyone else to do artwork for me, and dealing with sort of clients has helped me deal with trying to ask people nicely to come on the show, such as yourself. It's a lot weird how things that seemingly unrelated, you'd pick up skills from different areas to kind of culminate into your, in air quotes, main passions.
Yeah, and I think anybody who works in game design would agree with you, because also video games combine so much, right? There is coding, there's a lot of programming that goes into it. There's a lot of technical aspect to it. There's also, taking lessons on cinematic storytelling. There is audio design. There is, there's just so much creativity that funnels into that. So being a person who, even if you don't know everything, because who does, but like being a person who is interested in many different types of storytelling and game design, I think really helps you in this industry, because you're going to be talking to everybody anyway. I talk to our art directors a lot and our animation directors, just in my role, and am the first to tell you, like, I'm not a visual learner. I'm really not like a visual person, but they are. And, I can talk to them about, okay, here's my idea. These are kind of the emotional beats I want to hit. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. And they can say, oh, here are some ways we could do that. Maybe even like non-verbally, we could just use the visuals to tell that story. And being able to do that is one of my favorite parts of this industry. And I know, like I said, I was briefly a music major. I am not an expert in any way, but like I have a very deep interest in music and music theory, and having that as well has helped me in games and in working with our audio department has It's good. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, it's helped foster collaboration, because when you want to ask, the music department, oh, there's a really epic bit where we've written Miles to do this and that, I kind of want it to sound maybe a bit more, insert technical musical term here, and they go, oh, because of that the specific term you use, I know it kind of fast tracks and shortcuts rather than us having this conversation where you're vaguely trying to describe music, even if you know nothing about music. Little shortcuts along the way that really help foster collaboration.
Totally. And I think that one of the misconceptions about game writing, and maybe this is true at other studios, but it's not at Insomniac, and it wasn't at Telltale. I think one of the misconceptions is that we early on write a script and we hand it off and then they make it. The end. And now there's a video game. And that's just not really how it works in games, because so much of what we do is iterative, right? Like you are constantly play testing, you are testing for story comprehension as well. So we're constantly working together. Like the writers are very, very involved in the production process, and it's not the job of other departments to know the entire story and know all the character arcs and know all the thematic beats. It's your job. And so you have to be ready to talk about that anytime someone has a question of like, let's pick something random. Let's say someone's like, hey, I'm writing Rio's theme, like just the little song that's going to play every time she's about to come on screen. Who is she? I don't know anything about her. And you have to be able to immediately go, okay, well, here's some stuff that she does in the story. And like, here's kind of her thematic place in it all. And here's what she's, all of that stuff you have to be ready to say to help other people do their jobs. And that collaboration is really critical to us making something great.
Yeah, completely. And so linking in with that, obviously, You've had your hand in a lot of pies. So you've written for video games. You've also got your book coming out, which I won't forget. We will talk about it soon. But also like comic books and even short stories. Now, when I've spoken to other writers and things, when you generally write a book, for most sort of standard fiction books, it's quite insular. It's quite introspective. Yeah. You kind of sit in front of a computer and you just type away and edit and type and whatever. You may have people a little bit assist you, but it's quite yourself. And I assume short stories are very similar to that as well. But with comic books, because comic books are primarily a visual medium, and I still think today, comic book artists rather, still don't get enough recognition. They're just incredible people. And so with comic books, I know they're very much a collaborative process as well. You have, the writers really have to either write the proper notes or speak with the artists. So with video games, it's even more so, it's elevated, because video games have the kind of the weight of a movie, but with the interaction, which you don't really get with anything else apart from Dungeons and Dragons, maybe, but that's obviously a game in itself. So, how have you found writing your book, the comic books you've written, the short stories and video games? How is the process different amidst all of those? And do you have one that either you generally prefer or one that you find easier? Obviously, don't say I hate writing video games. Not that you would, but Sony listening. Do you?
I love that we're just using this podcast to ruin my career. We're just the spirit of the heart of my career. I would say the biggest difference for me is in perspective, and like, is this my thing or our thing? And on the spectrum of my thing to our thing, it goes like the book, which even then, the book, I wrote it, but it was also illustrated by Selene Pereira. So like, even then I'm like, Selene made it look really awesome. Like, and my editor, Brittany Brooks, just did so much wonderful work to take it from good and be like, what if great though, because she's an editor, that's what she does. But on that spectrum, the book feels much more like mine. My name is on the cover. There is obviously a lot of my voice in it because it's the whole freaking thing. And then up from up a few clicks from that would be a comic book where, like, again, it is my story that I came up with. It is my voice is in all the dialogue. But I think you bring up a really good point of like, it's my voice isn't all the dialogue, but the art is just as much telling that story. And in some ways, like, because it's a visual medium, even more so. So the comic book artist is as much a storyteller as I am. And, is taking these lines of description I've written and making it even better and even more dynamic and even more gripping. So like that is that is our shared story. So, and then a few clicks up from that, you get to like, I would even separate out a game with a small team. So let's say like Walking Dead had a smaller team because teams at Telltale were just smaller, and still pieces of it, you know, I feel a lot of ownership over, but there are lots of pieces that I don't really like. Maybe I contribute in the writer's room. I gave notes, I gave feedback, I might have even helped write it, but like a lot of people, animators, character artists, environment, like there were a lot of people involved. Other writers were involved in that, designers. And then a few clicks up from that, you get AAA video games where it's there. I mean, there are hundreds of people on some of these working on these games. And that is very much, this is our shared experience. Like I can see myself in a lot of pieces of Miles. I can see the parts that I really advocate for, the scripts I wrote. But even then, the scripts I wrote were blueprints. Like they're not what the audience sees, right? What the audience sees is how an animator and an actor and an audio designer interpreted what I wrote. So it's ours. Like even the scenes I wrote are something that we shared. And it is a shift in mindset. I think my favorite way to work is usually my day job because I have the most familiarity with it. And honestly, I just really like being able to bounce creative ideas off other people. I find it really fun to be like, hey, I want to get this emotional beat in. How can we do that? And everybody kind of weighing in. And I've done a little TV work as well. And that's also really, it's similar there. It's more of a shared product. But like any writer, I mean, I go through phases where I'm just like, I don't want to hear from anybody but myself. And I don't want to talk to anybody. And those are the moments where it's good for me to have side projects where I can just go off and write something and know that it's not me and 16 people doing this story beat. I'm just going to go write a script real quick and it's going to be awesome, you know? And those are the moments where I prefer to just be writing the book or the comic book. So I do love it all. On a day-to-day basis, I prefer video games and that collaborative style. But there are definitely times where I'm like, no. I just want to play with my toy. So.
Yeah, it's the collaborative element. It's I almost think of it almost like a net sort of thing, where it's like if you pull up the edges of the net slowly, eventually every part of the net is going to come with it, even if some are slightly behind. So if there is something that needs to get pushed forward, or if there's a story beat that needs to get done, you could maybe take a smidge of a step back for a day or maybe a week or a period of time. But at some point, you have to be involved to help push it forward again. Whereas when it's your own thing, especially if when you now I'll delve into the book, but I've got one more question beforehand. But like with writing a book, if it was in the stages where you hadn't had confirmation it was going to get published, it's like, well, I've in theory got all the time in the world. You can kind of, you can self-manage a bit. You can be like, oh, I've got a week here where I've got loads of free time. I can invest in the book. Whereas if you haven't, you're like, oh, I'm not kind of feeling it, so I don't have to do it. But whereas obviously Miles Morales, you're like, no, I can't just not show up at work because I'm not feeling it in that sort of sense.
Totally. That's honestly really hard for me in that knowing that other people are relying on me finishing a thing is a great motivator for me in a way that you're right. Like writing books is harder for me because I'm like, my book is, even if I've sold it, it's due in a year and a half. Like I don't need to do that right now. Whereas comics have a shorter turnaround period. It's like you have a month to write it. And even then I'm like, okay, cool. So the last weekend I'm going to write it. but with video games, it is like, you're so much on deadline so much of the time that it's like, that really helps me get everything done. And that's just a personal motivation thing, but it is helpful to have those deadlines all the time. Yeah,
completely. So, I mean, everyone works slightly differently, but I want to ask with Miles Morales specifically, once again, poaching from the She Plays Games podcast, is there's a specific character, Haley, who I was, enamored by. She's amazing. She's so cool and I love how it seems like I don't know if it was a concerted effort across the, and air quotes, nerdy culture, but it seems like characters who are deaf or hard of hearing, who use sign language, it seemed like there was almost none in mainstream culture. And then within 2 years, you had it in Eternals, you've got it in Miles Morales, and also there was Black Bolt in something that came out recently that I'm not necessarily going to spoil, but so we're getting Black Bolt is more of a breadcrumb, but there are now a lot more characters we're getting who don't have verbal ways of communicating, so they have to use sign language and things. I wonder if you could tell us just a bit about Haley, really, and just her brilliance. To be honest, she's so cool. I love seeing her in Miles Morales.
Yeah, if there was a like a concerted effort, I was not invited to the party because I didn't talk to anybody else who was about to do it. But I love it. I love that more actors, that more deaf actors, that more actors that use sign language are booking jobs like this and really high profile things. I love that that there is more visibility. I think it's such a great trend that we're all part of, and it makes me feel a lot of good feelings that like Haley is part of that trend. As I described on She Plays Games, the process of pitching her, as I said a little bit earlier, one of my favorite things about this job and one of the things I really loved about journalism is writing about things I don't know about. I love doing research. I love talking to people. I love that is one of the best parts of my job. And my first week at Insomniac, they were like, hey, so, we want to have this quest chain where Miles falls in love with his neighborhood. That's it. That was the prompt. So I needed to come up with characters for Miles to talk to while falling in love with his neighborhood. And so I came up with a list of characters. Again, I was doing a lot of research on like who, what do I want to show? What do I want him to interact with? What, like a lot of great writing and reading and research. It was so much fun. And I started looking into street artists who are really active in Harlem. And I started just kind of thinking about, it's hard to, pinpoint where an idea is born from, but I do remember having a thought like, what if she was a deaf street artist? What if that was, this is how she communicates, and she's also this really cool artist, and she's a community leader, and she kind of started to come together in my head, and I instantly loved her. I was like, yep, I'm gonna write her. And then from there, it was about, we had to cast the right person. We got Natasha O'Feely, who plays Haley, and then we got Josh Castile, who was he worked with us on sensitivity and making sure that he also watched all of her scenes and was like, okay, he worked with the animators and me to make sure we were framing her hands correctly and that you could see her face and that you could that he did a lot of really good work on making sure that it was all done correctly and that we got all the signs right as well. So they were both just invaluable in the process. And one of the stories I love to share is on the day that we shot all of Haley's scenes, I had written all these scripts and had said she and Miles will be communicating using ASL. And Natasha and Josh read the scripts and they couldn't have been more polite. They couldn't have been more kind. They were just like, hey, is it okay if we give you feedback on some of this? And, I was like, God, please, like, it's so much more important. There are plot beats we need to get across. Of course, there are emotional beats I want. There are characterizations I want, but like, it's so much more important that it's right, that it feels right and authentic than that my beautiful, perfect words stay my beautiful, perfect. Like, no, there's no contest. The former is much more important. So they gave me wonderful feedback. I'm like, okay, this is not how someone using ASL would say this. They would say it this way. This is, they together came up with signs for Marvel words that do not have signs in ASL. Like Roxanne needed its own sign. Haley needed her name sign, which they came up with. So they came up with all of that. So, I mean, they were so much part of that process. And I learned a lot that I didn't know about any of the culture around ASL because they were willing to share it with me. And, their work, I just can't say enough good things about them. They are as much a part of creating Haley as I was, if not more so. And I think, if there is a lesson to be extrapolated from all this, the big lesson is, don't be intimidated by what you don't know. Just embrace that you don't know things and hire and work with people who do, and take that feedback and and learn something from it. And you end up getting a really great character like Haley, who, I didn't, in retrospect, now we know that fans love her, but I thought a lot of players would miss her. She's in the side content of Miles. And I was like, maybe some people will like her. And so the response was much bigger than that. I mean, people really loved her. And in retrospect, I'm like, well, that makes sense because Natasha and Josh and everybody did such a great job. And the scenes are just so beautifully animated. Yep. I get why people love Haley. So it was really special. It was so great to work on her. It was definitely one of the best parts of my career so far.
It was amazing. Yeah, that was one of the highlights of your conversation. In video games especially, it's important when you're playing these things and you're interacting with these characters, as someone who doesn't share the characteristics of a character, when you're seeing them as just a normal person like they are, just because someone is different doesn't mean they're not normal. And with someone who is hard of hearing or needs to use American Sign Language to communicate or something like that, sees it being normal as well. So I want to further show my appreciation for the way that you've handled that, and also the whole team of just, it's so important to have characters like this and her personality being her actual personality. And it's just, she just happens to be someone who uses American Sign Language to communicate. That's not a core part of her personality, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it is a core part of how she interacts with the world. I do think that is really important. But it's not the only. You're right. Like it's not the only way that she interacts with the world. It's not, she still needs a personality. I think you're right. Is that it can be very frustrating when you finally get to see, and I'm saying this just even from my own limited perspective of when I was a kid playing video games and seeing like women characters that's and just going like, oh, there's a woman, so stop complaining. And then she gets nothing to do. And it's like, I'm supposed to see myself in this character, but there's nothing to see because it's not even a two-dimensional, like it's a one-dimensional character. So really the only thing that we could possibly have in common is that she's a woman, because she has nothing else for me to graft onto.
Exactly.
So I think, it is when you are creating diverse casts, and you just need to be thoughtful about it. You just need to treat characters like they are people and they are nuanced and they have flaws just as they have, really good traits. And that's one of the most fun and interesting things that we do as writers. Like, so do it. That's my really good advice for the day. Do the thing that is cool.
Exactly. And speaking of things that are cool, let's get on to your book that's either, depending on when this drops, it's either very soon to come out or it's just come out. There'll be, in my intro or outro, I'll ramble about it anyway, and I'll put links in the description. But the book itself, go on, tell us about it and we'll kind of jump off from there.
Yeah, so it is about women who were working in the games industry from the 1960s to about the 1990s. And we got a couple who are around the 2000s, but typically it is this span of time where if you talk to most people, even people within the games industry, you'll hear like, well, that it was all men. And finally we opened the doors and let other people in. And it's like, not really. There were in fact women there from the beginning who were making, some really popular and good informative titles. For example, Donna Bailey, who created Centipede, is a woman. And
I didn't know that.
Programmer.
I used to love that game. That was one of the first games I used to play when I was younger. I love that. Yep. Still do.
Yep. That was her. And talking to her, I was like, this was true for writing the entire book, but when I got to talk to her, like the fangirl was off the charts. I was like, oh, you're just so cool. She was talking about, kind of the creativity that went into Centipede and all of the bugs that ended up being, no pun intended, but all of the bugs that ended up being featured. Yeah. I was like, oh no. But like all of these moments of like mistakes that ended up being really defining in the game, and I was like, wow, so making video games is the same as it was back then because we do the same thing. It was really cool while I was writing the book to feel part of a legacy that there are all these women who have been making games since people started making video games, and they've been here the whole time. And In many cases, they weren't the ones being asked to do interviews. They were not the ones being invited on the awards stage, but they were there and they were very important to the creation of these video games that we've played and that inspired other game devs down the line. So that was kind of the impetus behind writing the book. And it was why I enjoyed writing it so much and getting to do all that research.
And what made you write the book? Out of all the things that you're already doing, what made you go, I'm going to add even more to my own plate? Obviously, it's a very important thing. I think it's an important subject to anyone, but obviously someone who your career now especially is so heavily into video games, it's such an important thing as a personal touch for yourself. But what was the thing that specifically made you go from, I've got an intrigue into, the women who've contributed to, I want to actually research, write, and release this into the world?
Sure. There were two big formative moments that happened. The first was Eric Smith, who is my literary agent, approached me and because he had played Walking Dead the final season and said, "Hey, I think this is a book that needs to exist. There needs to be a history book that focuses on women because there isn't one specifically for a YA audience. And I think you're the person to write it." And I said, "Eric, you're silly. That book definitely already exists. There's no way it doesn't." But then I did some research and I was like, "Oh, it doesn't." You were right. And there are definitely there's a ton of writing. There's a ton of great journalism that I, thank God for all that great journalism because it helped in my research a ton. There is a great book called Professionals of Play that lists a bunch of really great women that work in the industry. But specifically, this book targeted at a YA audience did not exist at the time. So that was the first step. And we started kind of talking about it. And I was like, I had just been hired in Insomniac. I think I was a couple months in. So I was like, I'm a little busy. But then I talked to a group of high schoolers at Indiana University. Indiana University was doing basically a week-long coding camp for high school girls. And they invited me to come talk about my day-to-day and working in video games and what it's like is, what are things you can expect as a woman? What are things you can look forward to? What is all these good things? And this is actually the intro of the book, but this is my live read version.
Preview, huzzah!
I did this whole spiel and this is my day to day. This is how I got into it, so on and so forth. Does anybody have any questions? And all the questions they asked me were about Gamergate, and that really broke my heart. All they wanted to know, and I don't blame them for it. I want to be really clear. They wanted to know about Gamergate. They wanted to know if harassment was as bad as it seems, and if basically why that harassment hadn't driven me out of the industry yet. And the reason that broke my heart, it is absolutely true that harassment happens and it needs to be reported on. Those stories need to be broken. I don't want to say we talk about it too much. No, that needs to be talked about.
100%.
But that's the only story they were getting. The only times they were getting to hear about women in games are when women were being driven out of games or harassed for being in games. And that's not the whole story. There are reasons that we go into this industry. There are reasons that we stay in this industry. There are really passionate women who are working in games right now. I work with a lot of them. I've always had women on my teams since I came into games, and I wanted them to see that side as well. Yes, harassment happens and it sucks and it's horrible, but also I get to celebrate wins with my team. I get to write scenes that I love. I get to work with actors. I get to do all these really great things as well. And that is really what shoved me out of, maybe I'll write this book too. I really need to write this book because there are women who were really passionate about games, even in the early days. That is also part of the legacy they would be joining. It's not just defined by the harassers and trolls of Gamergate. It's also defined by these women who have been badass from the beginning, who were doing the job. And it is open to young women as well.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I am, because I think when I think when I was researching some information about your book Gamer Girls, and I was like, I can't remember if it was a synopsis or if maybe it was when you were speaking on the other podcasts and things, and I think you said something along the lines of, oh, there doesn't seem to be a book like this. You know, that there are other books that touch similar parts of history, but not aimed at the YA audience or that sort of thing. And I was a bit like, I was like, isn't there? I was like, I've not personally looked into it, but I was like, that's weird. And then obviously you look into it and you're like, yeah, there's not really. And it's quite baffling. So the fact that you're writing it and you're the one doing it, I mean, kudos. And I look forward to it coming out and checking it out and things. But what's your process out of interest? Because obviously we've spoken about with Miles Morales and the other video games and things that you have worked on, are working on, you know, the collaborative process and as well with comic books. And I know you mentioned about your illustrator as well of Gamer Girls, but what is your process with the book itself? How did you go about writing it? Did you say, because obviously you had your Echo's main job in the day, did you set aside an hour each day? Did you just write notes when it inspired you? I'm just intrigued by your process in itself of getting the book together.
Yeah. Chaos.
Next question.
I wish I was one of those writers who's like, you know what, I'm just a workhorse and I do an hour a day and then the book is together. I'm not. I'm a sprinter as a writer, tragically. But I learned pretty early in my fiction career that I am not one of those people who can add an extra hour to my workday. Typically, I just don't work that way. Either, you know, adding it before work or after work. It just, that is a good way for me to burn out pretty fast. But I can work weekends. Weekends are good for me. So there was some weekend writing for sure. But the biggest one, I did a ton of research on weekends, just for about the first year. Was a lot of research. And then after Miles came out, I took a few weeks off work as a like, okay, that's done. So Mary needs a break. And I went to a cabin in the middle of nowhere. This is so like cliche. This is like straight up like some Stephen King novel stuff. But I took a few weeks off and I rented my cousin's cabin in the middle of Michigan. There's nothing there. There are like, the roads are dirt. And I went there and I wrote the majority of the book because nothing could distract me. There were no gaming systems. There was a squidgy internet, like nothing. So that is how I did it. So the process of writing the book, the first chunk was research, was pulling together all of these names and looking into all these women. And a lot of it was what research is available, what has already been written on them. Do they want to talk? Some people did not, and that's fine. Or some people I wasn't able to talk to because they have since passed away. So then it was, how much research is available, how much has been written about them, how much can be verified, all of that stuff that was coming directly from my journalism background. So thank goodness I had it. So tons and tons of research, pulling together names, starting to sketch out what the chapters could even look like. And then after I had pulled together that research and those outlines, then it got to actually writing out all those chapters. And as I was going, editing and one of the things that is a fun challenge about nonfiction is also trying to make things feel like a story versus like a list. It's not like, and then they did this and this and this and this, and that would be, everybody read the book would bounce off it because of course you would. So a lot of it was looking into these women's lives and histories and careers, and then finding like what is the through line, what really stands out about what she did and what she cared about, or what she still cares about in some cases of the people who are still working in games. So it was doing that for every single chapter. And then we went back and forth on how long the book should be too. So like at one time it was 30 and then it was going to be 20 and then we landed on 25 and then we were off and that was how it went.
That's amazing. Yeah. And you must have sort of other projects and things in the pipeline that you can't speak about or anything like that. But I wonder if this has inspired you again to be able to be like, oh, I've written a book. Obviously, it has not yet been released, but you have written a book. So maybe like, a few years' time, you've got another book coming out and then you come on the show and be like, yeah, you remember when I couldn't say anything about it? This was the book I was writing. So you've got so many things that you're sort of busy doing. And obviously there's a lot of things that you can't speak about. But I wondered if, as we'll start to wrap up here, because you've been very courteous with the amount of time that you've given me, but I wondered if when it came to sort of writing about Miles Morales, and you mentioned about the side quest and with Haley and things, the process with writing the side quests and Haley specifically and things, was that something where, as much as you can tell us, because obviously the company itself has certain things in place that you can't necessarily let out, but with your process of writing for a video game, because obviously the video game does have a linear story, but as a player, you can choose when to do most things in different order. Apart from the main narrative story, the side quests and things, you could do that for the most part as soon as you start the game or right near the very end and just go, right, final boss is next, so let's just do every single side quest conceivable. And I will say, on a personal note, like I loved Miles Morales. Like I played the first Spider-Man game, and then I was like, I need to 100% this, or I can't not do it. I have to. It was that kind of thing where it was like, it was so much fun just swinging about. I was like, I could just swing about doing there could be no enemies. There could be nothing. I could just swing for hours. So it's like, oh, yes. you can do that, and we'll give you objectives. It's like, I'm going to spend my life doing this. And then I finally 100%ing it after a while, after spending time doing X, Y, Z. And then, Miles Morales was out, and I was like, well, I don't have a PS5 yet. And even if I did, it's quite hard to get one at the moment. And then, it came out on PS4, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my life again, staying up stupidly late to finish it. And I'm this close to 100%ing it now. I've done everything apart from finishing it on New Game Plus. I basically got to the point where it's before the final battle, and the warning comes up, like, just so you know, if you go past this point, it's going to be the end game. And I just haven't plucked up the courage, because I've done the hardest difficulty, and I was like, I won't spoil it, but that end fight was so hard. And I was like, I need to 100% it. But it's like, maybe when eventually the second Spider-Man game comes out, which is announced a little while ago, maybe when that releases, it'll push me, because I keep wanting to do it. But one thing I wanted to note about it specifically that really meant a lot to me as a person is, and this is a mild spoiler for the first Spider-Man game, but people should have played it or know by now.
Yeah, but, it came out years ago now.
Yeah, exactly. So, if for some reason you're listening to me talk to one of the writers of the spiritual sequel of Spider-Man, and you haven't played Spider-Man and you don't want it spoiled, or just skip a bit. But obviously in that, Miles Morales' dad dies, and in Miles Morales' Into the Spider-Verse and his comic origins, there's variations of, the story of loss, which is very common with Spider-Man. But one thing that I loved about Miles Morales is the post-game side mission about postcards. Because me personally, people on the podcast all know this about me, but I lost my dad when I was 19. So I've got that, that kind of connection thing. And when Miles there's a moment, and this is a minor spoiler, but once again, the game's been out for a while and it's not about the main plot, but there's parts where you go around finding postcards, and in that you get little bits of audio from Miles's dad. And there's one line he says, and he's like, choking up as he's swinging and talking, kind of out loud. And he says, I never thought I'd hear my dad talk again. And I was like, oh God. Like, that got me right in the, right in the feels. So it was just, there are emotional beats in the game. And this goes for the vast majority of video games, but specifically I found with, the first Spider-Man and Miles Morales, there are emotional beats that one wouldn't expect. So I wanted to thank you as someone who is involved in that, and the entire team, not just the writers, but everyone involved in Miles Morales, for just that moment meant a lot to me. But also with characters like Haley, there's moments that she has, which I'm sure mean a huge amount to other people. So I want to thank you and the whole team for those little emotional elements, because the game was, fun as all hell, and it was so thrilling, and the story was great. But that moment really meant a lot to me in a time where I didn't expect it to. I didn't expect to play Miles Morales and get emotional about that. So I want to thank you specifically about that element.
I had, first off, I'm gonna totally name drop Ben Arfman, who was the lead writer of Miles and wrote a lot of that and probably that line as well, because he just brought so much of those surprising moments of tenderness and also very good jokes.
They are great.
I know exactly what you mean. And it so I played through it as well, because of course, like when you're on the team, you're also playtesting. And during Miles's development, I lost my grandmother, who was really heavily involved in, like, she helped raise me. She was like another parent. And I had the same thing of like, oh man, okay, I know what this feels like. Yeah. So I know exactly what you mean. And one of the, when I did my first, like my phone interview with Insomniac, it was it was like a couple days, maybe even only a day after I finished Spider-Man. So I was in prime, like, I'm going to freak out at him about how great it was. Because my interview was with John Paquette, who's the lead writer of Spider-Man, and so, no pressure. But I have told him since. I told him then. I'm going to keep telling him forever, even though, like many game writers, he clams up when he gets any kind of compliment, but too bad. That when Telltale, when I was laid off from Telltale, I was very adrift, like a lot of people, is that because you're not just losing your job, you're kind of losing your community. Like, I had moved to California for that job. I was seeing these people every day, and all of a sudden I wasn't. And it really was like being ripped out of your community with no warning. And it was a really hard time for me emotionally, because also, like, a lot of people, kind of reacted day of, we're very emotional and we're crying. And I wasn't. I was just kind of shocked. The grief didn't really hit me till a month later. And then there was nobody to share it with, because, like, we had all been separated for a month. So I couldn't go back and be like, could you all be miserable again? Because I'm miserable now and I need to commiserate. So I felt very alone in all that. And that's when I picked up Spider-Man. And that game, I didn't realize how much I needed a game that was talking, like, things are going to get better. There are people who will look out for one another. We can approach really hard situations with a sense of humor. I didn't realize how much I needed it until I was playing it. And it really got me through a hard time. And I think that's part of what makes it so special. And what I and I know everybody else on the team really wanted to honor and continue in Miles is that, like, it's not that Miles is dealing with easy problems. He is dealing with very hard problems, but he is not alone in it. He has Genki and Rio the whole time. It's not all downhill from here is I think part of the lesson that we kind of wanted to carry forward.
Yeah. Spider-Man is a lot about, even if you get knocked down, get back up again. Is a lot of the hope element, and it runs through all of the Spider-Man media. It depends on, certain comics less so, depending on who's writing it. But with those games, It was a huge, huge part. And I think it's so important for, people don't realize, if you said to me, oh yeah, you should play this Miles Morales game because there's an emotional bit about his dad in it, I'd be like, okay, that's a weird pitch for me to play a game, and it wouldn't push me to play it. But because it's already, spiritual sequel to Spider-Man, it was so much fun and all these other elements of it. And then in addition to that, you've got this emotional part. It's like the cherry on top is the term. I went for the cake. There's this little bit on the top that just made it, just the chef's kiss in a sense. And I know that we're trying to wrap up and I'm waxing poetic, but one of the things that was really
emotional for me to write, let's put it that way, was so I wrote a lot of the conclusion to the relationship with, sorry if this is a spoiler a little bit, but to the conclusion of the relationship with Prowler. So I wrote him, all of him in Act 3. I wrote their final fight, all of those scenes. And, I really had to dig deep for, like, times where I have had to, in my own past, where I've had to cut out a toxic family member who was hurting me, not because they wanted to, but because our relationship had gotten so toxic. And I was writing that boss fight and I was writing all the scenes around it. And I went to John and I was like, dude, I got nothing. I'm coming up empty. And he was like, you need to dig deeper. Like, why is Miles cutting him out now? Why didn't he do it sooner? What was what was happening in his head and his heart? And really also had to dig deep into, like, what are the excuses I made for people to keep them? And what was finally the breaking point? And how did I feel when I came to that point? And how did I feel in the aftermath? And that all really got shoved right into Miles's life. So sorry, buddy, like, that I gave you all this, but it was cathartic for me to work through. And I know I've also heard from some people, and some of the people who worked on it that said, like, it was also really cathartic to see and to play, is that, like, anybody who's ever had a difficult relationship with a family member can go, yup, I get it, buddy. I mean, maybe we didn't, like, punch each other across a room with superpowers, but, at the core of really powerful superhero stories, and in my humble, limited opinion, but at the core of them is what it means to be human. And we're cranking up the dial on what they can do and what they're facing. which just calls back to, okay, and what is the human heart of them that is telling them they need to do this and how to use this and why it matters to them.
Amazing. Very well put, and I agree with everything you said completely. Well, Mary, I mean, I feel we could talk about, I mean, there's so many other things. I know obviously you like Broadway musicals, you like Bake Off as well, and I'm British, so it's part of our culture. And you got loads of house plants, and there are plants in, this is probably the only room in the house yet that doesn't have plants all over it. So we could have spoken about other things for hours, but you're busy, and you know, I know that Megan's making dinner as well, and so we can't just talk forever, even though that would be delightful. But so we'll wrap up here, but please tell people where they can find you. Obviously I'll put links in the description as well to your website, etc. But kind of final statement, if you want to say anything else to the audience, final thoughts and plugs, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Yeah, final plugs. Easiest place to find me is Twitter. I'm, born and raised now, but I'm at Mary Kay News, which is from my time as a journalist. It's not because I think I'm important enough that there's like news about me. I want to be very clear. Mary Kay News is my Twitter handle. You can also find me on marykgames.com is my personal website. Those are the two best ways to find me. I'm not cool enough to be on other social medias, but I am sort of lurking around. And then, the other big plugs are just, I guess kind of a thank you to everyone who's been really supportive and has reached out about things that I've worked on, or even others have worked on that I am also a fan of that meant something to you. It's always such a delight to see and to get to connect with other people who love nerdy things. So keep doing that. Y'all are best. That's it.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for making time. And also, I'll put a link in the description about your book, Gamer Girls and Things, and I'll make sure that people are aware specifically, depending on when this gets released, on when that sort of comes out and things. And then, further down the line, the door is always open for you to come back on the show to promote, another book, or Gamer Girls again, or the Wolverine, when you can eventually, maybe after it's been released for us, you can actually talk about it in any way that won't get you in trouble. So, the door is always open. And just thank you for making time for myself and my audience. We all hugely appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.